Yep.
Welcome everyone to today's podcast. My name's Paul. I'm very happy to have been joined by Anthony.
Yeah. Good morning, everybody. My name's Anthony, and I'm a recovered addict and a grateful member of a 12-step program.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're here today to discuss something we call the spiritual malady. Now, this is a topic, Anthony, that intrigues me for a long time. And, the reason why it intrigues me is it's a really important principle. We talk about the threefold malady and others talk about the twofold malady. So I think that's a good starting point. Some people say it's simply a mental and a physical malady, an obsession of the mind and a compulsion of the body to keep using drugs, no matter what the consequences. I've no electric, it doesn't matter, get the stuff. If I get in trouble with the cops again, I'm going to jail, it doesn't matter, just do it. If I use again, my partner is going to leave, doesn't matter, just keep on using that drive to use no matter what. And that's the mental malady, isn't it? The mental blank spot. And then others, Anthony, believe it's a threefold malady, a spiritual disconnect from God, resulting in mental wrong thinking, wrong mindset, and then wrong choices. So there's a wide variety of knowledge and experience and views and perspectives on this. And in this podcast, of course, we're just going to be sharing our thoughts. What's your thoughts on the spiritual malady, Anthony?
My thoughts are between the twofold and the threefold. My belief is that it's a threefold. I mean, the main problem of the alcoholic addict centers in the mind rather than in the body, but the body is as abnormal as the mind. But there is an underlying issue going on, and that's an internal spiritual malady. It talks about it on page 52 of the book in the bedevilments. It touches on it in page 60, 61, the ego, the actor, the hypocrite, that wrestle that's going on within, the thorn in the side, or if you like, the affliction, the lack of power, the separation. And then and that internal spiritual malady, that incredibly short memory is to do with the distorted personality and the distorted ego. Because if my equilibrium, my spirit, my body, and my soul are at disease, which I believe is the malady, then I'm restless, irritable, and I'm discontent. And until I can again experience a sense of ease and comfort that a drink or a drug produces, there's only one thing for the chemical problem, and an internal spiritual problem is a spiritual solution.
Absolutely.
So,
Absolutely. And of course, if you're new to Cocaine Anonymous, if you've come across this podcast, this video on Skype or WhatsApp or YouTube, and you're struggling with drugs, come along to a meeting. These 12 steps are made to be worked with a sponsor. A sponsor is someone that gives their time freely to help and to bring a message of hope, faith, and courage, and to guide you through the 12 steps of C.A. so you can have your own spiritual experience and be set free from the disease of addiction, the compulsion to keep on using no matter what, which is generally the theme of this particular podcast. Now, there are 14 videos on this channel, one on each of the steps. There's one on sponsorship, and there's one that's an introduction to C.A, the program, the steps, and the fellowship. So please do check those videos out. If you've any questions, or anything you want to contribute to this podcast, anything you think we've not covered, because the reality is me and Anthony could talk all day long on this topic. So, this is just a brief introduction to the spiritual malady. If you're listening to this and you want to contribute something, please, by all means, put it in the discussion, the comments beneath, if you have any questions. And come along to a meeting where you can learn more about the problem and learn more about the solution. So we're on page 52, Anthony, on the basis of keeping things going. What do you want to look at on this page so we can drop through the different ones that you've given me?
Yeah, thank you, Paul. As and I like the way you touched on that. You do need, anybody back from a relapse or anybody who could be drifting, you need to get someone armed with the facts, as it talks about on page 18 there. But where we are at the moment on page 52, it describes the severity of the illness, the spiritual malady. And it says we had to ask ourselves why we shouldn't apply our human problems this same readiness to change our point of view. We were having trouble with personal relationships. We couldn't control our emotional natures. We were prey to misery and depression. We couldn't make a living. We had a feeling of uselessness. We were full of fear, the corroding thread of fear, shame, guilt, and we were absolutely driven by 100 forms of fear, self-delusion. We will touch on that in a minute. We were unhappy. We couldn't seem to be of any real help to other people. So, if I can't be of help to maximum help to the power, I choose to call God, and love him with all my heart, with all my soul, and all my might, and love thy neighbour as I love thyself. I've got no power. And what happens is the steps are the spiritual pathways to the power to move from this spiritual malady, which, which means I'm in whole. Step one, I'm in whole. If there's like a cake, imagine a cake and you cut it into 8 pieces. I take one piece out, that cake is in whole. But if I put that piece back in, it means the cake is whole. That is sanity. What we're talking about now is insanity. And it says, was not a basic other people, was not a basic solution of these bedevilments more important than whether we should see newsreels, lunar flights? Of course it was. So if I believe in a God, I've got to believe that there's an enemy. Now the enemy is, it's the bedevilments, as it talks about, which is the ego, is pride, it's fear, it's self, but not knowing that, that I'm restless, irritable, and discontent. And then we start moving into, how it works on page 60. And it's just after the pertinent ideas where it says, being convinced we were at step 3. Now I've fully conceded in step 1. I've made an admission and I've accepted the unmanageability, which is the spiritual malady, the internal spiritual malady, the incredibly short memory, I, self, and me. I'm running on self-sufficiency, self-reliance, self-will, right? And all it's doing is I'm like the jaywalker. The ego's being smashed, it's reconstructing. The ego's being smashed, it's reconstructing. Right, and then I come to this point, and I accept the power. I came to believe, and I choose to call that power God. And in step 3, I make a decision. What is a decision? A decision is to circumcise every other thought and make an abandonment to turn my will and my life. What's my will? It's my thoughts. What's my life? It's my actions. Oh, so I have to watch my thoughts because they become my actions become my habits become my character becomes my dynasty. So it says it here, it says the first requirement is that we be convinced that any life run on self-will can hardly be a success. Well, I can reflect back on my own experience, reflect back on your own experience and see if any life run on self-will can hardly be a success. So I know mine wasn't, and that's to do with the malady.
Absolutely. Absolutely, Anthony. And, just to explain to our listeners, you mentioned the jaywalker there. What page is that on in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous?
It's on it's in More About Alcoholism, and it's 31. I think it's 30.
Okay, let me just very briefly explain that. So we what's on the screen at the moment, listeners and friends and viewers, is a book called Alcoholics Anonymous, which we often call Big Book. It is available for around £12-14 delivered from eBay, Amazon, and elsewhere. And that's what we've got up on the screen. It's the basic text of Cocaine Anonymous, just in case you're wondering. Now, Anthony's mentioned the jaywalker. Now, the jaywalker, as Anthony says, it's in the chapter How It Works. It's around page 31, and it refers to a chap who keeps walking aimlessly in the traffic and keeps getting injured, and he keeps being warned, and he ends up in hospital with broken limbs. And people say, why do you keep doing it? Oh, yes, I know, yes. But then he goes and does it again. And then he does it again. And then he ends up breaking his back when a lorry hits him. And that he's talking about the insanity of active addiction, Anthony, isn't it? How we keep on using, as I said at the beginning of the podcast, whatever the consequences, we just ruggedly, determinedly keep doing the wrong thing. And the spiritual malady that we're talking about today is the reasoning behind that. It's an attempt to bring some light and some truth and some wisdom around this reality of the spiritual malady. Now, just as a quick aside, Anthony, I'll let you back in on this page, and you give me some other page numbers which we'll be moving on to, and then you and I have got a lovely text about the spiritual malady to put up in a few minutes. But just to explain to our listeners, in different cultures, what we call the spiritual malady in recovery circles, or the mental blank spot, or the insanity that precedes the first drink when we choose to pick up again, the insane thinking. In the Far East, it's called the yin and yang, the light and the darkness. In Christianity, it's the mind of Christ, the mind of God, and the mind of the devil, the mind of the flesh. In other belief systems, it's the light and the darkness, the beast nature and the holy nature. So whichever spiritual tradition you look at, this principle is outlined and discussed in Buddhism, for example. And what we're talking about is that the higher power, God, the creator, obviously has a mind, and the devil has a mind, and then we have a mind, and we are bedeviled in darkness and confusion, in the malady, in the madness, living to use, using to live, wondering what the hell's going on, why we can't quit. And when we quit, why we pick up again. So we're like that jaywalker, aren't we, Anthony?
Absolutely. So the illustration of the jaywalker is just really good. I mean, Harry Tebow, who was very close to AA when the book was first printed, the basic text of Alcoholics Anonymous, he speaks about the ego, which is the false self. See, we've got the true self and the false self. And the false self is the liar who comes out in remission into our minds, as you spoke about. And I love the illustration you give around yin and yang, around the flesh and the spirit for Christianity, around the darkness and the light, the duality, the battle that goes on within us spiritually. I do believe that we are in a spiritual battle, and this is where the malady comes into play. In Christianity, Paul, who was an out-and-out lunatic, he was persecuting Christians, and he had a Damascus, what they call a Damascus Road experience, a spiritual experience, where Jesus came back in spirit and revealed himself to him. And he had a deep, effective spiritual experience, an act of providence, a divine intervention. And, he was transformed. And the same thing, it's the same principle of what we go through when we're working this program. But if we're not working this program, I can't believe of where I'm at today to where I was. And, the illustration of the jaywalker, it's just when you look at it in the light of day, I mean, the illustrations through the more about alcoholism, as you spoke about, Paul, the mental blank spot, the insanity that precedes the first drink, that's the crux of the problem. Why do I keep doing this? Why do I keep doing it? Repeating the same mistake over and over again and expecting a different result. Albert Einstein, or you can wash a pig, but it will still return to the mire, like a dog will return to his folly. That's a proverb. And it's the same illustration with this spiritual malady. There's an internal spiritual malady. It talks about it on page 24 of the book. It says, for reasons yet obscure, alcoholics have lost the power to choose in alcohol. And then a little bit down says, we can't bring to our consciousness with sufficient force the suffering and the humiliation of either in a week or a month ago. We are without defense against the first one. And then if you look on page 61, now I remember my first sponsor said to me when he took me through this part of the book, he said, put yourself into this. So we'll start on where it says, he may be kind, considerate, patient. So if I put myself there, it says, Anthony may be kind, considerate, patient, generous, even modest and self-sacrifice. And on the other hand, he may be mean, egotistical, selfish, dishonest. As well as with most humans, he's more likely to have varied traits. So we're in a duality. I do believe that, we're in a battle, and this is where the internal spiritual malady comes in, because the body, the soul and the spirit, right? And what is the soul? It's your mind, your will, and your emotion. Your body, I believe that we're living in temporal bodies, and we've got a spirit, right? Now, if that's upside down and I'm disconnected and I've got no power, then my equilibrium is restless, irritable, and discontent. I'm at ease. I'm feeling at dis-ease. I'm feeling separated.
Absolutely.
you know, and I'm full of fear. And, you know, I believe that that's false evidence appearing real. That's another part of the spiritual malady. The liar, again, is out in remission. You know, I do believe the God I believe in, he never give me a spirit of fear, give me a spirit of power, love, and sound mind, you know. And this explains it so lovely here in the book. You know, he says, so our troubles, we think, are basically of our own making. So if we go to the paragraph above, it says, this is the root of the trouble. Selfish and self-centeredness, that we think is the root of our troubles. Driven by 100 forms of fear, self-delusion, self-seeking, self-pity, we step on the toes of our fellows and they retaliate. Sometimes they hurt us seemingly without provocation, but we invariably find that at some time in the past, we have made decisions based on self, which later placed us in a position to be hurt. You know, so the way I look at this, the selfish and self-centeredness is the root of the trouble. It's the fear-based, self-centered, and then I'm driven, and I'm a baffled lot, thinking, how does this keep happening? How does this keep happening? Until I can straighten out physically and mentally, and that's the only way I'm going to do that is by working this program. Go on, Paul.
Absolutely. And you know, the beautiful thing about sobriety, Anthony, and coming to meetings and listening with the heart and not the cold intellect, is we get to learn what is true. You know, and what is true doesn't change from century to century. So what I mean by that is when I look at my journal from last year, the year before, which I have right next to me here, I'm amazed at what was revealed to me on those particular days. And I always put the date when I do a journal entry, which isn't very often nowadays, to be fair, but I do put the date, Anthony. And when I look back, it's amazing the transformation and the understanding that was given by grace on those days. And you know, here's the wonderful thing about sobriety and a spiritual program of action and a connection with a higher power. You know, what we discover and learn remains true. I mean, we're reading from a book from 80 years ago. It's called The Big Book. You and I read regularly from another book called The Big Book, which many believe this book was taken from the scriptures. Now, you know, the truth has not changed, Anthony. And we get to look at these things. We get to contemplate these things. And, you know, in a state of sobriety, you know, God's wisdom permeates us and we get to look at our active addiction, you know. So if you're listening to this and you're struggling with drugs, at step one, we take a real honest look at the consequences of our active addiction, right? We take a look at the effects we had on others, on our minds, on our bodies, on our wallets, on our employability, upon our relationships, our brothers and sisters, parents, children, neighbours, nephews, nieces. We take a look at the real-time effects of our using history, right? And it has been said, Anthony, that if we've worked a proper, thorough step one, which for me, by the way, is not just showing up in a meeting. I'm not one of these guys who are 1, 2, and 3 in half an hour of a phone call. For me, step one is a proper step. You know, it's at least an hour of work to take a real rugged look at the realities of active addiction and the using career that we have, the harms we've done. You know, and that is the foundation stone. That is really, you know, the lump hammer applied to the concrete of the spiritual malady. That is really the beginning of the smashing of the ego. That is the beginning of becoming right-sized. That's the beginning of being true. You know, I spent a lot of time in the building industry, Anthony, and a wall, it's not modern English, but the wall had to be true. You know, the wall had to be straight and plumb. You couldn't have it leaning one way or leaning the other, or that'll do. No, it had to be true. You know, and step one, well, all the steps are about what is true, and we become true, you know, instead of being deceived and deceiving. So, you know, what I'm trying to say, I suppose, Anthony, is, you know, when we get in the process of the steps, the spiritual malady begins to be dealt with. We're in a state of disconnection from our higher power, from our creator. You know, which results in wrong thinking, which results in wrong living. And through this process, we get in touch with ourselves, with our Creator. We get some wisdom and serenity, and what happens is we get life within that results in clear thinking and right living. Now, I realize this is just a very brief discussion of these things. One could talk for hours on these topics. The general idea is that, just as it's a threefold problem: disconnection, wrong thinking, wrong living, connection with the Creator results in right thinking, results in right living. See, so that's the idea. And through the 12-step process, we get that connection with God and with others. We start working with others. We do a meeting a day. We have several pieces of literature that we dip into each day. Very often the big book, the 12 and 12, our spiritual literature, perhaps another recovery book, and we keep bookmarks in them and we dip into them. And we have vital spiritual experiences each and every day. And that journey, that habit forming of having regular contact with people in recovery that are living this lifestyle, that have taken these clear-cut directions, that are moving along right lines, the fellowship begins to work for us. Anthony, come back in, my brother. I'm going to move to the next page while you come in.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree with you. You're absolutely right. And, it is a threefold illness, and it's also a threefold solution. I'm just going to touch on it from the doctor's opinion, and it's XXV and I'm going to start at the bottom of this. It says, men and women drink essentially because they like the effect produced by alcohol. The sensation is so elusive that while they admit it is injurious, they cannot after a time differentiate the true from the false. As you spoke about, when we start hitting that foundation and cutting through the bedrock, and we can start actually seeing the severity of this illness. And it says, to them, their alcoholic life seems the only normal one. They are restless, irritable, and discontented unless they can again experience the sense of ease and comfort which comes at once by taking a few drinks or drugs or whatever it might be in the compulsive nature that you're being driven and you're trying to fill the void or looking for instant gratification. It says drinks which the internal spiritual malady will drive. It says drinks which they see others taking with impunity. That means with no effect. After they have succumbed to the desire again, as so many do, the phenomenon of craving develops and they pass through the well-known stages of a spree, emerging remorseful, with a firm resolution not to drink again. This is repeated over and over unless this person can experience an entire psychic change. There is very little hope of his recovery. For anybody who's still in active drug addiction or alcoholism, who's listening to this podcast, there's only one thing that you'll start straightening out for a chemical problem or an internal problem, and that is a vital spiritual experience. And this is what we've got on offer here in CA. We've got the 12 steps, we've got the literature. Paul spoke about the good book. That's the book I live from. The big book is where I work from, and our other literature in the 12-step program. And it says, on the other hand, and strange as this may seem to those who do not understand, once a psychic change has occurred, the very same person who seemed doomed, who had so many problems, he or she despaired of ever solving them, suddenly finds himself or herself easily able to control his or her desire for alcohol. The only effort necessary being the required to follow a few simple rules. So once you start realizing this is about, for me, it was about, once I got here, and getting someone that was armed with the facts, it was about being willing, honest and open-minded. Whereas before this was the malady. I was constitutionally incapable of being honest. I was a cannot and a will not. I made many resolutions, but never a firm decision. So the thing is, now we're looking at the book, and it talks about the alcoholic on page 73, leading a double life. Right. So I let it, you get different types, all different walks of life, steer is the captain's table. This disease don't discriminate a race, a creed, or a color. There's 9 billion people on this planet. You know, there's a common problem, there's a common solution. But it says more than most people, the alcoholic leads a double life. The personas, the ego, putting on the masks, that's the malady. It says it's very much the actor. To the outer world, he presents his stage character. This is the one he likes his fellows to see. He wants to enjoy a certain reputation, but knows in his heart he doesn't deserve it. I think they call that the imposter syndrome. You know, and that is part of the internal spiritual malady. I don't even know I'm lying, denial, because that is the cunning, baffling feature of the malady, is denial. You know, and crossing the river of denial, because the liar is out in remission. It's in, you know, and then I'm living this insane life, double life, you know, and I'm the actor, and I'm trying to present, you know, a stage character. But by coming into recovery and working this program with someone that's armed with the fact, I uncover, discover, and recover. I hurt, I heal, and then I help. I trust God, I clean house, and I help others. You know, instead of being a reactor, I become an actor, but an actor in the right sense of doing the right next thing and adhering to spiritual principles. You know, because if I'm not adhering to them, then I'm running on self-will, self-sufficiency, self-reliance, you know, and I believe that God gives us free will. But if I'm not connected to the power, then I'm in the internal spiritual malady, I, self, and me. Incredibly short memory. I can't bring to my consciousness with sufficient force the suffering and the humiliation of even a week or a month ago, because the liar is out in remission in my mind telling me it's okay. I can't, you know, it's telling me, it's not bringing to my consciousness with sufficient force of when I might have overdosed, or when I might have crashed a car, or when I might have walked out, or when I've robbed some money off of somebody, or, you know, driven, you know, or when I've let people down, you know, because I'm, you know, I'm driven, you know, I can't make no important appointments, you know. And then page 82, it talks about the tornado. It talks about the tornado. And it actually says, I just got to find it. Well, I'll touch on this. It says, each might pray about it, having the other one's happiness upmost in mind. Keep it always in sight that we are dealing with that most terrible human emotion. Now, this is all fourth column. This is all malady stuff, defects of character, imperfections, you know, deficiencies, you know, flaws in the makeup, if you like, you know, the enemy, the ego, the pride, you know, the devil, if you like. Good human emotion, jealousy. Good generalship may decide that the problem be attached on the flank rather than the risk to face-to-face combat. I think the tornado's on 81, Paul. I think. No, ain't. It's here. It says, it's here, 82. Sorry. It's at the bottom paragraph, and it says, the alcoholic is like a tornado roaring his way through the lives of other people. Hearts are broken, sweet relationships are dead. Who can identify? Any of my listeners here can identify. Affections being uprooted, selfish and inconsiderate habits have kept the home in turmoil. We feel a man is unthinking when he says that sobriety is enough. He is like the farmer who comes up out of the cyclone cellar to find his home ruined. To his wife, he remarks, don't see anything the matter here, Ma. Ain't it grand? The wind stopped blowing. So he's come up, the whole house has been wrecked, and all he's worried about is, oh, the wind stopped blowing.
Yeah, and I think, Anthony, that's the epitome of the issue. You know, the self-deluding self. I love everything you've had to say. You know, it is the liar. It is the deluded mind. You know, that there's no problem, no matter what the consequences. We just carry on using. You know, or we did. You know, and in recovery and sobriety, we get to learn about these realities. We get to learn about the mental blank spot. We get to learn about the spiritual malady. That malady is an old word for our younger listeners. It means problem, and malady means a problem. You know, and so the spiritual problem is a disconnection from our Creator, which results in wrong thinking and wrong actions. And that same wrong thinking keeps us locked in those wrong actions. So whilst this may seem like interesting intellectual discussion, this is actually a matter of life and death for someone in recovery, you know, and it's definitely this exact issue that keeps people locked in active addiction. They don't realize they're separated from God. They don't realize that their lifestyle is absolutely damaging to themselves and those around them with sufficient force to cause them to quit. That's the point. You know, there's that disconnect between reality and behavior, you know. Anyway, I'm going to go ahead, Anthony, at this stage, and I'm going to put up the other information that I've got for our viewers today, which is hopefully here. There it is. Now, this is by a chap called Barefoot Bill. And there's quite a lot of information. So I just want to say to our listeners, you can indeed pause this video at any point and play it again, distribute the video, and you can read this at any point, you know. So, I mean, here at the beginning of this reading, this chap Bill compares the alcoholic to the psychopath. And really, you know, for myself, Anthony, it was like treating my wounds with mood and mind altering substances. That's what I see as today. You know, and today, Anthony, I get to ask myself questions like, what's wrong with how I feel right now? Why did I want to, or perhaps why do I want to? You know, many alcoholic addicts deep within have a subconscious yearning to still be using, you know. Oh, yes. Human beings are very complex creatures. You know, we're spiritual, emotional, mental, and physical beings made in God's image, very precious, very complex, very unique, and yet all the same. Now, you know, I'm not saying you're good self, Anthony, but many alcoholic addicts do have a lurking desire, you know, to escape reality, you know, to medicate on their feelings because they feel maladjusted to life, unable to face ordinary living without mood and mind altering substances. But we know that God gives us power to be able to do that one day at a time and to help others and to be of service to our fellow man. And indeed, there's no higher thing on the planet than being of service to our fellow men. So, you know, the problem of psychopathic thinking is not dissimilar to that of the alcoholic addict. And, you know, we treated our wounds, our feelings, our experiences with mood and mind altering substances. And as you've just read or stated, you know, many of us drank and used because we like the effects produced. You know, I was counseling, you know, I work with others as you do, Anthony, every day, you know, and I was talking to a dear member yesterday. You just can't stop using, Anthony, just cannot stop, you know. And the thing is, when all this information, Anthony, you know, and you and I have sat in hundreds of hours of face-to-face and online meetings, you know, when the information becomes revelation, then you have transformation. And that sounds very highfalutin, but it's not. When the information becomes revelation, or in other words, experiential knowledge, that's the power of the fellowship. Identification, Anthony. When we go in these meetings, we hear our story. It's from a different mouth. It might be from someone in a different country or a different sex or a different age, a different substance addiction.
Absolutely.
But it's our story. And that's the principle of anonymity. We come to these meetings, it doesn't matter how old we are, rich or poor, what colour we are, none of that matters. What we used, the fact is, we used to use. Today we don't drink and use. We found a way out and we share about it in meetings. Now, a quick word about Zoom meetings. You don't feel that I think, Anthony, many people don't come to Zoom meetings because they think they have to put the camera on. Now, the meeting that I help out a little bit with is called We Can Recover, and it's on twice a day, every day at 2 p.m. and 8 p.m, 14 times a week, 2 and 8. Now, it is actually an audio meeting that allows the optional use of cameras, you know, and even video meetings, Zoom meetings that have got going over the last year and a half during the so-called lockdown. only around a quarter or a fifth of attendees put their camera on. So don't be put off going to a Zoom meeting thinking that, you have to put your camera on. The reality is most people do not. So, and nor do you have to speak. You're very welcome to come along to Zoom meetings and simply listen. If you'd like to share, that would be great. Now, in these meetings, Anthony, we have identification, which is largely the power of the fellowship. And it's a society. The support outside the meetings is phenomenal. In most Zoom meetings, people put their numbers in the chat, for example. And I know you usually do, Anthony. And people can ring you or I and get support and encouragement and this knowledge. Now, the thing about knowledge is when it's experiential, when it's your own experience, that's where the power is. When it becomes revelation, in other words, when the creator, when God is active, when your higher power is active and in your knower. I believe every human has a built-in knower. When you're hearing the truth, You know what I mean? You don't need someone to say, "Oh, Anthony, by the way, that's true," because right? The only thing that gets in the way is the intellect, the liar, as you amply described it, but when you're hearing the truth, right? And so it becomes experiential, like, wow, this is real. Yes, it's real. And when that information becomes revelation, then you have transformation. And that is that we are reborn. We become different people. We have, I read in a meeting 2 days ago, Anthony, a portion of the big book Alcoholics Anonymous that you and I like very much. I think it's the appendix 2 or 3 at the very back of the book, page 567. And it talks about the spiritual experience, how it can be of an educational variety. And we spoke very much about that. And this dear one I was talking to yesterday, Anthony, can't stop. Been coming along to meetings, but their behaviours I see. You and I have been around long enough, Anthony, to see all kinds of people come and go in these rooms. And people come along, and it can sometimes take them months and months and months before they quit. But what I see, Anthony, is sometimes their behaviours will change. They're using the way they use, who they use with starts to change. I've seen incremental changes. So I've also seen, sadly, people die before they get clean. So, in the real world, not everything it works out great, but I've seen people that have slowly got this information, that have slowly had an educational spiritual awakening, psychic change of perceptions. Come on in on today.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree. When you started, you spoke about the delusion, the belief that's not true, and the malady is a French word. It means to be deceased. But getting to meetings and as you said, I mean, rightly on Zoom, you don't have to put your camera on. It's optional. And get into the meetings and hearing the message, because the power of identification, as you spoke about, Paul, there is power in identification. It talks about it in a general way, what it used to be like, what happened, and what it's like now, the A, B's and C's. And when the newcomer or the person back from a relapse, because it says it in the promises, no matter how far down the scale we have gone, we will see our experiences there to benefit others. Right. So this is, what we're talking about, the malady, right, is a selfishness, self-centeredness is the root of the trouble, and the thing we're looking at on screen now, or, it talks about above everything else, I must be rid of this selfishness. I must, or it kills me. Start bringing this into the AA meetings, CA meetings. Ask the question, what does this mean? Now, ask people, what does it mean? If you're not too sure, you don't know, you don't know. When I come in and I didn't know, I had to ask people. I had to unlearn to learn. I had to get humble. This was, because we're up against life or death, jails, institutions, dereliction or death. This don't discriminate a race, a creed or a colour or a walk of life. It wants to kill you. It's as simple as that. And the only way we can combat it and straighten out, it says resentment from its stems. This is in the book. All forms of spiritual disease. This is what we're talking about today. the spiritual malady. And the only way we can straighten out physically and mentally is by working this program with someone that's armed with the facts. Someone who can take you through the steps from their own experience as well, you know, and help you to straighten out. Because it says, if you look at the screen, it's saying I'm maladjusted to life. This is what the doctor, in full flight from reality, and outright mental defective, thanks Dr. Silkworth. That means drinking or not. Because if I'm not working this program, and I'm not adhering to making conscious contact, and I'm making a conscious decision every morning to hand my will and my life over on a daily basis, you know, I can fall into what we call the pity part. I can fall into, you know, selfish and self-centered thinking. I can be driven by pride, by jealousy, by greed, by gluttony, by lust, by sloth, you know, by envy, if I'm not adhering and working the principles and making conscious contact. And it says, although I look like a full-grown adult, I remain childish, because it's that emotional undevelopment, you know, then I can remain grandiose and gravely emotionally immature. You know, I'm quenching my spirit because I've not got a connection, and I'm falling into what we call the pity pot. And it says, as a going human, I think, and then I'm thinking, all I'm doing is deflecting. I'm not looking at myself. I'm looking at everyone else. The grass ain't greener on the other side because God waters it everywhere. You know, if you say you ordered egg and chips and I ordered a T-bone steak, if I'm feeling restless and irritable and discontent, I'm looking at your egg and chips, and I've got a big old T-bone steak on my plate. You know, so, and it explains it lovely here. You know, it says the condition of being which is excavated with a complicated by an obsessive, compulsive, impulsive, excessive, controlling, demanding need for attention, acceptance, and unqualified approval. A condition of being which renders me restless, irritable, and discontent with life. So I'm not happy with my lot. You know, I'm thinking that, you know, I am happy with my lot today. I'm grateful. I'm a grateful member of Cocaine Anonymous. You know, I was a heroin addict, a crack addict, a prescription, private doctors, national health doctors, you know, prison doctors, alcohol, you know. But you know what? I found out that was just a part of the symptom. I needed to get down to causes and conditions, you know, the underlying issues of this illness. You know, and it tells us there, it says, you know, we were in a position where life was becoming impossible. Go on to the bitter and blotting out the consciousness of our intolerable situation as best as we could. Or it says in the book, start looking for spiritual help. You know, it talks about nervousness, anger, worry, depression, jealousy, or the like. You know, big book, page 37. And then we just touched on the bedevilments, page 52. You know, our friend was a minister's son. He attended church, page 56 of the book, where he became a rebellious at what he thought was an overdose of religious education. For years thereafter, he was dogged by trouble and frustration, business failure, insanity, faced a illness, suicide. These calamities in his immediate family embittered and depressed him. Post-war disillusionment, ever more serious alcoholism, impending mental and physical collapse. This is what the malady. So this is the thing. You know, if we're separated from God, right? You know, and if you go back to the, you know, you can take it back to Adam and Eve if you like. You know, they were living in paradise, and then, you know, sin come along. You know, you know, if you like, the liar. You know. And he deceived Eve into eating the what they call the forbidden fruit. You know, and once that was where the malady started. You know, that's where the malady actually started. You know, and so the only way we can straighten out physically and mentally, you know, is by working this program. You know, if you look at the top of this page, what's on the screen now, it says, suppose we fall short of the chosen ideal and stumble. Now, this is, you know, does this mean that we're going to get drunk? Some people tell us so, but this is only a half truth. It depends on us and on our motives. Now, this is talking about sex inventory. It's as if we are, because if I'm restless, irritable, and discontent, you know, I can be driven by lust, pride, jealousy, envy, greed, self-manifested into various ways, self-seeking, self-importance, self-indulgence, you know, selfish and self-centeredness. That we think is the root of the trouble. So the program teaches us to start becoming selfless, and it's an altruistic program. It starts teaching us, Paul, it starts teaching us to actually adhere to getting out of self, and that's what this is ultimately all about, getting out of self. What you read.
And I think as well, Anthony, we in the program, as we work this program with others, it's a we program, and indeed the difference between the word illness and the word wellness is you change the I for the word we, wellness. And so it's the community, the fellowship that very much works for us, and we get connected. We build a support network of ordinary folks that have got free, and I think the idea is what we really have is a daily reprieve contingent on the maintenance of a fit spiritual condition. So that means from day to day, I'm working with others. Anthony, I'm answering the phone, I'm suiting up and showing up for life. I'm available, responsible, or at least a lot more available and responsible than I was back in the day. I'm trying my best day by day to do what I need to do. To remain sober and vigilant, and to be available for others. And so that's what we call being in the solution. We continue our spiritual journey. We listen to others, and we do the next right thing. And we become self-aware of becoming irritable, restless, and discontent, to the point where we become sensitive, because we become aware through listening to the truth in meetings that our behavior and our speech can reveal where we are spiritually. So in other words, if I start speaking harshly, upsetting others, mockery, scorn, anything like that, lies, gossip, slander, all that stuff, that can reveal that I'm not pursuing my spiritual journey, my connection with God, as I ought to do. And that can be the warning sign that sooner or later my behavior will be the next thing to go, which then can be a sign that a drink or a drug could be round the corner, as it were. And so that's the idea. We become self-aware, particularly of our words and behaviors. So we're coming to the last 5 minutes of the podcast now, Anthony. And there's quite a lot of information. So what I mean, you feel free to, I don't want to bind you up if you've got things to do, but I mean, I'm going to keep it going for a little bit longer until we've gone through. There's about another 5 or 6 pages of this, but we don't have to read it. It's just so people can get a chance to read it if they so like. And don't forget, to our listeners, you can mute this and you can go back and just read this for yourself, what's on the screen. Our suggestion is come along to a meeting and listen to people in recovery that have managed to get free. Please feel free to like and subscribe and check out the other videos. Again, if you've just clicked on this and you're completely new to CA, welcome. My suggestion would be check out the podcast on steps 1, 2, 3, etc. Beginning at step 1. There's also one as an introduction to CA. So, in summation, Anthony, I would say that learning about the spiritual malady is not just to do with getting clean in the first place, but is very much to do with leading a happy life today.
Well, I wholeheartedly agree with that as well. It is about living a happy life today, because it says alcohol was just a part of the symptom. And if you go back up the page a bit, it talks about the 4 hideous horsemen: terror, bewilderment, frustration, and despair. And if I'm not working this program, I've heard people in recovery, I'll get up, we all wake up in the mundane on the planet, everybody, people that are in recovery and people that are not in recovery. And this is where ultimately it's about seeking the kingdom of God first, and all his righteousness, and all shall be added unto you. This is where we have to implement our step 3, our step 7, our step 11, the Lord's Prayer. This is where we have to implement the process of doing the readings, taking inventory, because it is only a daily reprieve contingent on the maintenance of our spiritual condition. And there's promises. There's only one thing for a chemical problem, an internal problem, and that is a deep, effective spiritual experience, if you like, an act of providence or a divine intervention. And what the steps do, they awaken our spirits. Because if I'm not working this program, I can quite easily fall asleep and fall into this malady again. The ego, start edging God out. That's what the analogy stands for, edging God out. So the ego, the distorted personality and the distorted ego is the equilibrium. It's the spirit, the body and the soul. What's your soul? It's your mind, your will and your emotion. And if they're at disease, then that's when from the shame and from the guilt stems the low self-esteem, then the pride which stems the low self-esteem, and then I'm feeling restless, irritable and discontent until I can again experience a sense of ease and comfort. And that sense of ease and comfort might not come in the drink and the drug. It can manifest in different ways. I can work, money, food, sex, the gym, other obsessional behaviors.
Yes, that's right. And I think the purpose of today's podcast is largely what it says at the top of the screen there, that we might understand this disease thoroughly and work the complete program of recovery. And there's much controversy about whether addiction is a disease, but at the very least it's the lack of ease. So it's disease in that respect. I mean, it's not contagious in the sense of you can catch the flu or something off someone else that's already got the flu. However, it is contagious in the fact that in my experience, every addict I've ever come across became an addict by spending time in the company of other people that were addicts or that regularly used. So it is contagious in that respect. But working the complete program of recovery is where it's at, So the spiritual malady, I think, as I said at the beginning, this is such a wonderful topic. We could literally talk all day. The great thing is that there is a solution. That God, the creator, the higher power is more than able to set to anyone. Our message is hope, our promise is freedom, that any addict, can quit using, lose the desire to use and find a new way to live. So, that's our promises. And you and I have seen it happen in countless men and women, haven't we, over the years?
That's right. That's right. And it's very cunning, baffling. I mean, you look at the screen and what it says. Number 2, dishonesty begins with patterns of little lies, escalated by self-delusion, self-deception, and making excuses for not doing what's called for. Impatience. I want that. I want now. Others are, so this is all the invirtue. This is all, the defects, the 4th column, the defects of character. And what I'm looking to do when I go through this process and identify, uncover, discover, I start to recover. And the way I do that is in the 5th column when I start looking at the attributes, looking at the virtue. What's a virtue? It's a good quality. But if you look at the inequalities, if you look at the virtue, what we're looking at, the defects of character, all this stems from me being, separated from God, right? And there's impatience, there's argumentative, there's depression, exact nature, frustration, self-pity, cockiness, and that's all to do with the ego, false pride, feeling low self-worth, low self-esteem, shame, guilt, or feeling more than that ego, self-importance, edging God out, thinking I know it all, I'm trying to play God. And what the steps do, and looking after the first half of the first step, it's about the deflation of ego. It's about humility. It's about change, right? And it's about being humble and adhering to these principles. Getting some meetings, hearing the message, getting the sponsor, start working the steps, getting a home group, whether it be on Zoom or face to face, whatever, that's your choice, and putting the action in. Because otherwise you're going to be living in this, and it's not a nice thing to be living in, and what it says it there on this insane thinking, is going to lead to you picking up a drink or a drug again. And it's only a false sense of ease and comfort. It's all falsity, because you're going to wake up the next morning still feeling restless, irritable and discontent. But if you start adhering to these principles and work in this program, your life will start revolutionizing. You know, you just look about, get to the meetings, hear people, hear in a general way what they used to be like, what happened, and what their life is like today. You know, I'm 6.5 years clean and sober. I'm a productive member of society today. I've got my own flat. You know, I'm just on the process of buying a vehicle. I've got plenty of friends in recovery. I've got, as well as working the steps, I enlarge on my spiritual life, through my faith, and as I said, I live from the good book and I work from the big book and our other literature, and I realized today a lot's been cast into my lap, but the whole decision thereof is of the Lord. And I'm grateful. I'm a very grateful member. I give all glory, honor, and praise to the God that I understand and the God that I believe. And that's the only way I overcome and straighten out physically and mentally, by the grace of God and work in this program, which is the steps of the spiritual pathway to the power to overcome this internal spiritual malady, and adhering to the basic principles. What I need to do: pray, meditate, cultivate gratitude, cultivate consideration, take inventory, start the day on page 86, finish it on page 86, live in 10, 11, and 12,
Yeah. And I think as well, Anthony, what you said earlier, the problem of mankind is deception and delusion. I believe, that virtually every man on the planet to some degree is deceived or deluded to some degree. Now, obviously, there's a massive sliding scale. But the reality is, each day we are to seek the truth, know the truth, walk in the truth, think the truth, and practice the truth day by day. That is it. At the end of the day, it's that which is true that matters. And only because men do not understand the Creator, do they not have a connection with the Creator. And because they are deceived and deluded, they don't realize the virtue and value of that connection with their source. Now, if you unplug a toaster from the wall, you won't get any toast, no matter how great a toaster it is. And ultimately, those that refuse their connection with their source will ultimately find themselves disconnected, be it in life or in death. And the reality is that for many, active addiction is a living hell. Many of them long to die. That's the awful reality of it. And that's because of the spiritual malady. They don't realize, that a connection with a higher power can liberate them from the disease of addiction. And looking at this very last bit before we just wrap things up, Anthony, at the very bottom of the screen, there's Bill Wilson. And he says he's got all this going on, and you mentioned it, and then he says that he still has that desire for another drink, And so what we have is a daily reprieve contingent on maintaining a fit spiritual condition. Now, like yourself, it's been a long while since I've drank or used any mood or mind altering substances, Anthony. And I'm quite confident that if I keep doing what I've been doing, I will keep getting what I've got, which is sobriety, permanent sobriety. I have recovered from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body, and that's the key there. It seemed hopeless, but that was because of the dark and deluded state, you see. So learning about the truth and what is true and who is true, in meetings, we learn about what is real pertaining to life. We learn that we can face life clean and sober. We don't need to get high to face life. All the lies and the deception of cocaine, alcohol, cannabis, and a drug is a drug is a drug, whether it's liquid, powder, pill, potion, or rock. Alcohol is a drug. Medically and scientifically. The fact that it's legal is neither here nor there. Alcohol is a drug, and for many of us, Anthony, at the bottom of that can or that glass was the drug dealer's telephone number was there, at the bottom of that glass. And so we stay clean one day at a time. We don't use no matter what. We make changes to people, place, and things. And recovery, sobriety, can be the best thing that happens to us. And we learn to be sober and be vigilant and be aware of the disease, of the bedevilments, of the deception and arrogance and pride and grandiosity that we've read about. So recovery is well worth it. Thank you so much for coming along today, Anthony. That's been really, really cool.
No worries, you're welcome. I mean, the worst case scenario is, you know, you can either go onto the bitter ends, and this is where the internal spiritual malady will take you, or start looking for spiritual help. And, you know, just look around, as we said, you know, it's evident. It's a we program, not an I program, you know, and we have recovered, as Paul said, from a seamlessly hopeless state of mind and body today. And we can never rest on our laurels, which is yesterday's victories. It's just what we do today. You know, I never got eye on yesterday's supply. I don't stay clean on the shower I had yesterday, or a bit of service or a share that I done yesterday. It's a 24/7 program. You know, it's a 24-hour program. So, you know, if you're still out in active addiction, to any listeners, or you're back from a relapse, or you're, you know, you're a newcomer, get to some meetings. There's some good meetings online. You know, we've got the 2 o'clock meeting here, which me and Paul frequent, and it's a really good meeting. And, you know, there is a solution. You know, there is a solution, and I'll leave it there. Thank you for letting me share and be of service.
Good stuff. Thank you so much, and thanks so much for coming along. Okay, listeners, that's us done for today. Please stay connected. Get yourself to a meeting, some spiritual literature. You can do this too. Thank you so much for joining us today. Okay, good stuff. Thanks, Anthony.